Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. And this week, on Saturday, September 14th, 2024, the Navy is commissioning the newest USS New Jersey. She is only the third ship to bear the name, and the first one since Battleship New Jersey was commissioned. She's going to be a Virginia-class fast attack submarine, so in honor of her commissioning, all of our videos this week have to do with submarines. And usually something submarine related that we can tie back into the battleship. So, in tonight's video, we're going to talk about why there are so many submarines preserved as museum ships. When you compare the number of ships of certain types that have been saved, you've got like 8 battleships, 5 aircraft carriers. In the United States, you've got 3 cruisers, you've got another couple around the world. There's a fair number of destroyers, but submarines, there's something like 16 World War II era fleet boats that have been preserved in the United States. A couple more similar vintages that have been preserved overseas, and a couple of newer types of submarines, experimental submarines. Growler up at Intrepid is a post-World War II submarine. Nautilus up in Connecticut. There's all these great submarines that have been preserved, and why is it that submarines get preserved in such high numbers? One of the reasons why battleships are preserved in high numbers, especially compared to aircraft carriers or cruisers, is because battleships are named after their states. So you've got the whole interest and financial backing and willpower backing of a state for preserving that vessel. It's like Battleship New Jersey is in the state of New Jersey. So we get a tremendous amount of support from the state and from people in the state who aren't even related to the Navy. They just like that this ship is named after their state. And it's like that for North Carolina, Massachusetts, Alabama, Texas. That's pretty common for these ships to end up in their home states, if at all possible. And so it's relatively common for battleships to be able to be preserved. When you compare it to ships like aircraft carriers can be named after people or battles. And so there just isn't an area with that sort of backing to acquire ships like that. And fortunately, some aircraft carriers are so historically significant that they were saved anyway. There were cities or states or other organizations that said we have to acquire this ship and preserve her in the long term. But it's far less common. Likewise, cruisers. Cruisers are almost as big as a battleship. They're almost as manpower intensive as a battleship when it comes to restoration and preservation. But they're named after cities by and large. And so it's much less likely, one, for it to be a city that you could get that cruiser to, and then two, for that city to have the financial wherewithal that, say, the state of New Jersey or the state of Texas has to support their museum ships. As you go down, destroyers are very similar in that they're named after people usually, and so it's kind of difficult. But submarines are just the perfect size and shape. It's very difficult to take a surface ship and put it on land, put it in the basement of the Chicago Museum of Industry, put it in a field in Arkansas or Oklahoma. Like, it's very difficult to do that with large ships. But submarines, because they have a circular hull, that allows them to support themselves much better, and they're light enough that you can transport one across the parking lot of the Chicago Museum of Industry and lower it into the basement. That is something that's doable. They are sort of the largest warship that you're able to do that with. So that's one reason, that they're small enough to be maintainable, even by organizations that don't have the full financial backing of their state. It's possible because they have such a small number of interior spaces. I think it's 8 or 11 spaces sequentially when you go on to a World War II fleet type, which is by far the most common type that's been preserved. And so you can get really high levels of preservation. You can stage stuff to look really accurate, and there are a number of submarines that have been able to restore their interiors to look really, really great. Bowfin is really well preserved on the inside. Cod is fantastically interpreted on the inside. Cobia, a number of other ones. I I'm not going to list them all off here, but I haven't been on too many submarines that I go inside and like they're empty. Some of the rooms I go in on the Battleship, even rooms on the tour route, I'm walking through like, man, this space is dingy, man, this space is empty. And it's just not like that with submarines. You can really restore these to look good. Another thing that helps with submarines that makes them an excellent education tool is that they're fairly esoteric. Like, people think they know how surface ships work. It's relatively simple. They float, you put a crew on them, they go out, but submarines are this mystical thing, and so it makes them really cool to visit. When I worked back in Baltimore, we had a Civil War era wooden sailing ship, we had a pair of Coast Guard cutters, and we had a submarine. And the submarine was not the largest ship in the collection, nor did she have the longest service life, but she was the one that got the most visitation because I think people were the most interested in how she worked. And finally, in the time when ships were being turned into museum ships largely, many of the museum ships that we have now get turned into museum ships sometime in the like 60s, 70s, 80s time period. Well, that's right when we were getting rid of something like 200 or 250 era, World War II era diesel electric submarines. So these are submarines that have active service lives. These are submarines that have some historic significance to them. And we've got a lot of them. And at that same exact time period that these ships have gone from being decommissioned to sitting in mothballs to now they're awaiting final disposal, you also have a lot of the folks who served on them retiring. And so you've got both the expertise to acquire and maintain one of these, and the boats themselves are reaching the end of life in their Navy and Reserve services. So we've got this perfect confluence of people being available to do this, of these boats being available at just the right time period, of them being far more financially sustainable than a large ship like a battleship or an aircraft carrier. At a time when you've got a bunch of cities redeveloping from being industrial cities to being tourist areas, so they need ready-made tourist attractions to put in their place. And there's something that's pretty far into the average layperson, but not so far in that you don't know what they are. Like, you hear the word submarine and you immediately know what it is you're about to go on, as opposed to destroyer or cruiser. What's the difference between those two? The average person probably doesn't know. But the difference between a submarine and a battleship, yeah, one sinks real good and then can come back up. So all of these things came together at a time that allowed them to become the most numerous type of ship that's been preserved. And it's very fortunate that we did, because after those diesel boats, submarines start to be made with nuclear reactors and they start to get much larger, and so now it isn't possible to preserve them in any sort of numbers. Maybe we can take the sails off, maybe we can save Nautilus for her historic significance, but saving a 6,000 ton or 10,000 ton boomer that's got nuclear power is probably never going to happen. So I'm glad that we were able to preserve these World War II era boats, so that we will continue to have them for years to come to educate the public on the sacrifices of World War II and Cold War era submariners and what it's like to serve on these submarines, and also give those young people who might be interested in this sort of career an opportunity to see what that's like. So submarines are the most abundant museum ships, but they're spread all over their country, and they're some of the only ones in the interior of the country too. Count through the museum ships you visited, and what sort that you visited is the most abundant. Have you been intentionally making trips to visit all 8 battleships? Have you been visiting a bunch of different types of ships because you live in Buffalo or Baltimore or South Carolina, and you've just got collections of multiple types of ships? Let us know in the comment section down below what type you visited most often, and what type's your favorite to visit. Do you like visiting submarines because they're so immaculately restored? Or do you still like the awe factor visiting a battleship, even though half of the spaces inside are relatively empty? Let us know in the comment section. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State. also from a number of other businesses and private individuals like yourselves. We really appreciate your support. There's a link in the description below if you'd like to donate to support the museum. You can also support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people find out about us and the channel. Thanks for watching.